All right.
Okay, Jane. Out of respect for you.
A couple minutes pass, and sure enough, as soon as I say that, 2 more people hop into the waiting room. But it's 9:02, so why don't we go ahead and get started? Good group of folks on the call this morning. So we wanted to set aside most of this agenda today so that we could recap on questions or details on the InvestNH housing program. We have Mikael Pyrtel from BEA and Noah Hodgetts from the Office of Planning Development in BEA, who are here to speak to the program or take any questions and get us some follow-up on those. I think I put links to the program page in the agenda, so feel free to go on that and check it out. Right now, the part of the program that has been released is the $60 million pot of money for the private sector sort of gap funding programs. The $40 million in public sector programs currently are not listed on the website. So with that, I'll hand things over to Noah or Mikael, if you guys wanted to say anything about the program up front.
Why don't you go ahead, Noah? Thanks.
Sure thing. All right. Well, thank you all. As James said, my name is Noah Hodgetts. I'm a principal planner at the Office of Planning and Development. I'm not officially one of the new InvestNH staff, but I did help write most of the capital grant guidance. So I can kind of walk through where things are at now. We will take questions. If you have I can answer kind of general questions. If people have kind of eligibility questions that get really nitty gritty, I'm going to ask that you submit those via writing to investnh@livefree.nh.gov. But I'm happy to take kind of general questions. And I've just put the email in the chat box. And I guess before I start, what would be helpful to know is, can folks just kind of raise their hand if they were on the webinar last Thursday? So I kind of know what knowledge base we're working with. All right, so it looks like a kind of pretty good, looks like most folks that have their cameras on were on that webinar. Okay, so then I don't think I need to kind of go through all the nuts and bolts. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I think probably makes the most sense, if that's okay, James.
Yeah, it looks like I need to, hold on, I hit the wrong button.
Nope, I can do it, we're good.
Oh, okay.
Cool. So this is the main Invest 603 page that redirects to the Invest New Hampshire page on the NH Economy site. Here you'll find a number of different things related, items related to the capital grant program. The first is the detailed program guidance document, which I would strongly suggest, if you haven't already, to take, if you really want to learn about the nuts and bolts of this program, to take a little time to kind of read through this and really kind of understand. The details are really kind of spelled out in painstaking detail throughout this guidance document. So if you haven't done that already, I would strongly suggest kind of doing that. The next link here, as I just referenced, this is just the overall slide deck from last Thursday's webinar. The third link is the actual recording of the webinar. And then the fourth link, which probably a lot of folks haven't seen yet, is the application, which went live at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. So that's all live now. I can talk a little bit about kind of the overall kind of structure of the program, and then maybe get into questions. Does that sound good to folks? Does that work for folks? Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm not repeating too much information that you've already heard. Okay. So let me go back to the slide deck then. So $60 million funds, BEA has control over 50 million of those $60 million. The other 10 million of the capital grant is going to go to New Hampshire Housing Finance, New Hampshire Housing, to put into their funding of affordable housing projects, either through the low income housing tax credit program or their other state affordable housing funds that they administer. So within the $50 million, we are reserving 10 million, a minimum of 10 million is going to go to projects that produce 3 to 15 units and or that are being developed solely by a nonprofit developer. The maximum award, regardless of project size, is $3 million. And to be eligible for that $3 million, you'll need to show a 50% match, which can be in the form of equity or or financing or a combination thereof. For the 3 to 15 unit projects, all rents will have to be capped at 80% of AMI based on the fair market rent area that the project is located on. And I can show folks how to get to that, look up that in a minute. So for the 3 to 15 unit projects, 100% of the units have to have their rents capped at 80% of AMI for a minimum of 5 years. For the 16 plus unit projects, 16 plus unit projects, a minimum of 20% of the units have to be capped at 80% of 5 years, with the additional stipulation that in addition, there must be an outside public or private funding source that imposes affordability restrictions at least as stringent as the BEA affordability requirements of 80% of AMI for a minimum of 5 years. On the kind of threshold question of where is a project in the kind of development, pre-development kind of phase and permitting. So in order to be eligible, this is a gap funding program. We're only going to be covering hard costs and the hard costs for the affordable units. And in order to be qualified for the gap funding, the project will need to have all permits in hand, including the building permit. So they will need to have gone through zoning, gone through site plan review, gotten their approved site plan, met the conditions of the site plan review, and gotten their actual building permit. Unless the reason that they don't have their building permit is that they're waiting on some conditions, some state permit, whether that's shoreland approval, septic or subdivision approval from DES, wetland permit from DES. If they're on a state right-of-way and need the driveway right-of-way permit from DOT, if they're waiting on state historic review from the New Hampshire Heritage Bureau, or they're waiting on historic review from the Division of Historic Resources, those kind of things. Those would be the only conditions that would kind of be, you could kind of assert for the reason you don't have a building permit in hand yet. So
Noah, is that only building permit, or would that also apply to site plan review? Because I think most site plan reviews would require some, if not all of those things prior to signing the plans.
So if you have all those things, then, if you have site, right, to your point, you're probably going to need most of those state permits in hand to get your site plan. We're just trying to say in those cases where maybe you don't need site plan review, whatever, those aren't going to be very common, but if you're only doing a couple of units and for some reason you're still triggering a state permit. So to answer your question, no, that wouldn't only be limited to building permit on the state permits.
Okay, so somebody's still pending conditions on a site plan, as long as it was only state permits, you're okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Yes. And that's a good question. And Mikael, do you mind, if you're not already, kind of taking notes on these questions so that we can make sure that they get addressed kind of more formally written, but that's a really good question.
It is. Yep. Thank you.
Great. Yep. Other questions, or do you want me to keep going for now?
I've got another one, but if anyone else wants to jump in. Seeing none, I'll ask it. You mentioned that, for the full funding, you were going to need 50% matching funds that could be either equity or financing. Does that need to be non-federal? Like, would that need to be lending from a commercial lender? Or if there was any like governmental lending programs or things like that, would that fit into that as well?
We haven't, that's a really good question. I do know that the guidance says that this can't replace, I believe the guidance says this can't replace other federal, in lieu of other federal funding. Let me get back to you on that answer. Because I think that is something that we need to kind of make a more definitive answer on.
Gotcha. Thank you. And I'm not seeing any other hands, so why don't we keep going?
Great. So, we've gotten a couple of questions, and I think, Robin, you might have had a question on Somersworth. I think Teresa might have helped you to find kind of the rents on kind of this kind of distinguishing in the rent levels. So, in order to kind of tie this to the affordability thresholds that a lot of other programs use, especially that New Hampshire Housing uses, they always tie back to the HUD rent limits, which tie to the fair market rent areas. Now, unfortunately, what that means is that lower income communities often get grouped into areas that have higher incomes. And so the rent limits are not always going to be representative of what you might think the median or 80% of AMI rent limits should be for a community. And that's unfortunate. So for example, just say, we'll look at Somersworth as an example. Don't mean to pick on you, Robin. I just know that the question came up. So if we go to Somersworth, we say, okay, we're in the Portsmouth, Rochester, NH HUD fair market area. So then we go back to our guidance. This is pretty small, so let me pull up the guidance document so you can all see it. So Portsmouth, Rochester, 80% of AMI. These are pretty high. These are still very significant. We're talking about $1,565 for a studio, $1,676 for a 1-bedroom, $2,012 for a 2-bedroom. And so I don't know exactly what the kind of market rents are in Somersworth. My guess is those might be closer to market rents. Is that kind of the struggle that you're having, Robin? And
Yeah, I don't. I wonder if anyone else has anything to add. My developer was floored that he is entirely focused on Somersworth, investor and developer, and he was floored that he was in alignment with Portsmouth because he sees the value is so distinctly different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's waiting. He's actually waiting for this for me to get back to him after the phone call, but he was surprised. And
Yep. So that just is what it is. This is obviously going to help developers be able to get higher rents in lower income areas. And unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but one of the decisions we made is that to help especially smaller landlords that aren't used to doing income certification, we're not requiring income certification of the units. So only the rents have to be fixed, but any tenant making any income could live in these units. So that's the kind of AMI rent level question. I will know that these are gross rents. So you do have to back out utilities. So unless the landlord is covering every utility, heat, hot water, electric, that would probably normally cover water and sewer because they only have 1 meter for that. the rent that they're actually advertising could be may have to be lower than that, unless they're including every single utility. So I'm going to stop there. I think there's a lot of other stipulations that I'm happy to get into, but I think that's kind of the big picture. Let me just see if I can get back to, sorry, my sharing screen. Okay. I guess the one other part to note is that these are, we're advertising, it's a grant program, but they're forgivable loans that will be forgiven upon construction completion and initial occupancy of the units. And the reason for that is that these are federal dollars, in that for the purposes of a developer not having, or a property management or owner of the building not having a permanent interest, the federal government having a permanent interest in their real property, by making them a forgivable loan, we're able to dispose of the interest in federal real property by making them into a forgivable loan. If that makes sense to folks. Do folks have other kind of general questions I can be helpful answering at this point?
Yeah, I have a question. I think Chris Parker already answered this in terms of legality, but we can all agree, I'm sure, that 5 years is nowhere near enough to make the impact that InvestNH Hampshire would really like to make. And I understand why they're doing it, because it's going to be tough to get the money out the door, even as it is. We're very lucky we have a project in the hopper that will fit it like a glove. I think a lot of communities just don't. The question I have is, the rules are, Noah, that as I understand them, there has to be some sort of other pressure on the developer for the 5 years. In other words, it's not just what the state says, there has to be somebody else saying that. In our case, it's the town. Can a community go beyond the 5 years is the question. Can somebody say, well, look, we like this, it's great, you're going to use InvestNH, but we're not letting you do it for just 5 years. We're going to make you do it for 20 years. Is there any way we can do that, or is that illegal?
So you can, now you're getting into a separate section of kind of RSA. So I think it really depends how you're permitting. If you're permitting under the workforce housing statute, I don't know how you're permitting and kind of trying to put a municipal affordability requirements. If you're, now you're getting into the question of what can't you do in inclusionary zoning, I think is really kind of where you're headed. So if you're offering a density bonus to your builder in exchange for providing certain units at a number of affordable units, or a certain percentage of affordable units, then you could get into actually requiring a longer affordability period. Just asking for that, you could ask for it, but I don't think you can actually, I think you'd be on very shaky, I'm not a lawyer, but you'd be on very shaky legal ground to just force a applicant to just agree to that without them voluntarily agreeing.
Great answer. Yeah, so we have to offer something. You can't just
Noah, I think it sounds like from this conversation too, the answer to your question, Darren, is you can do whatever you would otherwise be able to do under your zoning and your regulations and how you would approach it. It has nothing to do with whether or not they're applying for InvestNH. Exactly.
Yeah. And I will also say that you'll see on the, I stopped sharing my screen, but there's a listing about positive scoring inputs. And one of those is that we are going to give more points to projects that have longer affordability periods, longer than 5 years, so that we can, to your point, Darren, try to encourage and fund projects that are a lot longer than the bare minimum 5 years. Because I agree, that's not nearly enough.
Noah, so applications opened yesterday, and I think I saw they run more or less until Labor Day weekend.
Correct.
Are these applications being scored on a rolling basis as they come in, or are you taking applications until Labor Day, pausing it, and then you pick them all up to review and score together?
Yeah. So no, I anticipate, we're going to be looking at applications and making sure that the applications are complete. But no, we will not be scoring until it's not the capital grant program is not rolling. It's a fixed deadline of when we'll be doing the scoring after a certain date. So we're going to wait until we have a good mix, all the full mix of projects to go through the scoring of everything at once.
Okay, so for that, you, as you said, you might be doing simple threshold reviews, but getting bonus points for things like the extra time could very well matter then if it turns out to be highly competitive, as opposed to just sort of, you got a decent application at the beginning, so it gets through, and as the funds dwindle, you need to try a little bit harder. Exactly.
Yes, I would encourage all your developers and go back to your communities and kind of talk to them that a developer applicant has no incentive to put in an application today versus kind of waiting 2 months to try to make sure they've dotted the I's, crossed the T's. You're not getting a leg up by putting in an application now versus on September 1st or September 2nd.
Okay. So if these start getting scored in September, do these have to go through governor and council prior to award?
Yes. So we did lay out, don't know if it's here. They do. So no, not prior to scoring. So the application closes September 2nd, 4 p.m. We will then BEA will make a list of awards on September 30th. Okay. And then we will say those are subject to GNC approval. And they will be submitted individually. So GNC, because this is what they asked for, governor and council will have the opportunity to approve or reject the contracts for each project individually. If they don't like the way a certain project is set up, they could have the discretion to not approve the award for a particular project. And then that will go to the November 2nd. That's scheduled for the November 2nd GNC meeting.
Okay. So theoretically, applications for this program will be getting their money functionally sometime mid-November, late November?
Yes, but remember that also the funding, these are not a straight award of like just advancing $3 million to a project. The awarding of funds will be done on a reimbursement basis. So a developer starts construction, they start, framing or whatever, they are then going to have to submit, I think we say monthly, but don't quote me on that. They're going to have to submit reimbursement for every construction expense, and then we will issue funds going forward on a reimbursement basis.
And is that reimbursement for construction only during the award period that would theoretically be after GNC?
So are you asking, would we approve backdating construction that's already happened? I think is what basically paying for
if something is in progress now, or they're looking to break ground in September or something like that.
Right. Let me, again, that's a really good question. Team's gonna have to kind of think about that one and get back to you. Because I don't know if we contemplated that scenario.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if you're looking at, these things are going to be available and effective in November, a lot of people are probably going to look at that and go, okay, I'm wrapping up mostly for the season, and I may as well assume that I'm going to use this for things that I'm working on starting next spring.
Right. And you'll have 18 months. So yes, my tentative thinking is that typically working on other awards or other kind of programs is that typically the contract is forward moving on a reimbursement basis. But we need to consult with our attorneys and legal counsel to see if there's any flexibility there. But I understand what you're saying.
Yep.
And then James, I had a follow-up question for you. You talked about the site plan question earlier, where you said the only reason that a site plan might not have been issued was but for not having all state permits in hand.
Yep.
Is there a way, so in that case, the site plan approval wouldn't actually be issued? It wouldn't be a site plan approval with conditions that the state permit be
The
issued?
way I write my notices of decision in Northwood and structure my conditions are, I'll list the deadline for when things are due to me. And so frequently, especially if there's something like alteration of terrain involved, those are conditions that I'll require prior to the signing of plans, i.e. prior to final approval. But I may have other things that the town would require prior to issuing a building permit.
Yep. Okay. So you have your record of decision, but you don't, with your site plan, but you don't have the building permit issued yet.
I mean, they would have their notice of decision that indicates they have final approval.
Yeah.
The site plans or conditional approval, they would not have the site plan physically signed by the chair
Right.
to indicate final approval. So for
Okay.
something like that, if somebody did it my way, they would have a detailed letter that says you need these 5 things before the chair can sign the plans. And some of them may be, you just need to make slight revisions to the text of the plan and hand it off to me. Some of them might be, I need to see your alteration of terrain permit, because without that, I don't think you can have a valid site plan, and therefore you're not finally approved.
Mhm.
So from my perspective, it would work for an applicant to take that notice of decision to you and say, I've met all of these things, or do a check-in with me as the town planner, and I would initial, yes, they've given me everything that they have the power to give me on their own, and all we're waiting for is alteration of terrain, a driveway permit,
Yep.
and a state
Yep.
septic design.
Yep.
Yep.
Great.
But that would be different from having final site plan approval.
Sure. So that's
Right,
fine.
you could split it up with the conditions precedent, conditions subsequent. So that, the conditions are identified as what can be done at the beginning, and then the conditions subsequent are not getting kind of bogged down with having the money released, getting the program started. Because I would do the same thing that James is talking about, where there's, before the plan is signed, they would have to submit, proof of their permit, all those kinds of things before the building permit could be issued, but conditions subsequent shouldn't be wrapped up into that. So maybe they should really just be kind of set out that way that James is talking about as well.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. So yeah, so I don't see we'll definitely clarify that in writing, and thanks for that example, James. Yeah,
Mhm.
There's no prep. That is the idea. The example and how you do things would be totally fine for eligibility, as long as the only conditions left for your final sign off, or the chair's final sign off for the site plan, is like an AOT or a septic or some other state permit. So,
Okay.
Yep.
Paul dropped a question in the chat. When does the 18 months start? Is that from the date of GNC approval, or is that from the first draw?
Yeah, so let me just look at so 18 months starts from the day that it's here. It'll be in the FAQ, but that's from the day that the awardee receives a letter that GNC has approved their award. So from GNC approval. And I will say, I know we've gotten some pushback on the 18 months, that may not be workable for some people. So 18 months is still the kind of the rule, but obviously construction delays happen, so on and so forth. You know, there's issues that can come up during a project. We will, if there's a construction delay, problem arises, supply shortage, you know, you can't get, you know, the certain materials are on back order, whatever, and that's holding up completion beyond the 18 months. We will work with the awardees to kind of work through those scenarios. And if they can demonstrate a good faith kind of effort of trying to work through those issues and trying to resume construction, we will have the ability to issue waivers on a limited basis if there's certain situations where you're going to go, project goes beyond that 18 months. With the understanding that construction wouldn't be able to go beyond 12/31/24. And the reason for that is that if we otherwise BEA and Gopher will lose the ability to reprogram, recoup, and recommit any of those funds, any of those ARPA funds.
So I've got a general question, and it's sort of for Noah and sort of for the group. When we were going through like PPP and some of the other programs, a lot of you all were helping your businesses try to either compile the information for those applications, or you were trying to assist them in filling out the applications. Do you anticipate having to help any of your developers fill out these applications? And would it be worth, you know, would we be able to see what the application actually looks like, or do most of you not care about that? I guess raise your hand if you are dying to see what the application form looks like. I don't see any hands, so never mind.
Okay, I'm happy to share it because we did just launch it. I can just take 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, if it's that short, sure.
I'll go through. I'm not going to go through every question, but just since we have some time. So I've already registered, but basically in the system, can everybody see my screen again? Hopefully, yeah.
Yep.
So in the system, you'll go to here. You'll have to create an account, and then once you've created an account, you will get to. Now you're not seeing the right screen. Hold on. You will get to something that looks like this. It'll say start entry. You'll go down to capital grant program. You'll put in the name of your application name, which I think I actually have to do. I haven't tested this now that it's in production. Test 1. There'll be some initial eligibility screening questions. You know, are you a responsible developer, owner of multifamily? Do you comply with the affordability requirements of the program? Are the number of units required for program eligibility intended to be affordable regardless of the availability of funding through this program? That question is there because we have gotten this question a number of times. This is gap funding. This is not funding to write down the rents on a project. So if there was a developer that was originally planning to do 50 market rate units, and I was like, oh, I can get $3 million extra, $3 million extra of funding from BEA, and I can lower my rents to 80% of AMI, we're trying to discourage that because those aren't actually, while those would create more affordable units, those wouldn't actually create any new units that weren't already going to be produced. And this program really has a dual kind of mandate of producing more units and also making sure that we're trying to create as many affordable units as possible, if that makes sense. Can you demonstrate a shortfall? Will the completion of the project result in a net increase in affordable workforce housing in the area? So you'll see there's just kind of simple eligibility questions. Once you've gotten past there, there's basic project questions. I'm not going to go through all this. Kind of construction completion dates, type of construction, number of units, number of market rate, number of affordable units, breakdown of market rate units, unit mix, kind of description of site layout, whether there's going to be ADA units, and then there's breakdowns for these questions if you answer yes or no. If you answer yes, there'll be breakdowns of yes, kind of please describe. Fuel source for different kind of utilities, so we can calculate what the utility allowance should be to back out your utilities if you haven't done that already. And then there's a whole section on affordability restrictions and what the affordable rents are. Again, what your FMR area is. And then we get into the financial information. What's your kind of total development cost? What's your per unit development costs? How much debt or financing have you secured? How much equity do you have in the project? What's the unfunded gap? What's your requested funding request per affordable unit? And then just kind of qualifying that this is based on an unexpected budget shortfall. And then we ask for initial budget estimates and any subsequent budget estimates. Then there's a section on regional housing need that we are basically only requiring for the larger projects creating a minimum of 16 units. But again, this is a little bit so we can have a little bit more narrative. Obviously, if smaller projects are welcome to add this, but a little bit more narrative to tie to about the need for the project. We haven't asked about like indicators of local and regional housing need because we already have a lot of that data from NIFA and from what's being worked on for the regional housing needs assessment. So we tried to lower the bar for applicants to have to try to go out and find that information themselves. Then there's a narrative if you want other information. Then there's a couple of different checklists. These are planning, document uploads, evidence, site control, that the rents are achievable. If the project creates over 15 units, we're also going to ask for history of projects over the last 10 years and a list of references, documentation that the project is going to be practically completed as planned. Then on financial, this is where you would upload your evidence of financing commitment from all sources, evidence of the equity, breakdown of the capital stack for more than 15 units. Then this is where you put in your documentation of your initial versus any subsequent budget estimates and your breakdown of final versus current, your initial versus final or current project hard costs. Sorry, I'm going through this really quick. I anticipate that we'll probably be putting out a FAQ for the application since I have a feeling we're going to get questions on kind of, especially from less experienced developers or smaller landlords, of what we mean by certain parts of this. And then finally, this is the permit section where you'll upload either your local building permit or your building notification form, or should be another place here for zoning compliance certificate if your community doesn't issue building permits. And then finally, if you're omitting anything, and then finally, there's just some disclosures at the end. So that's a kind of really quick overview of the application, just so you can kind of get a feel for how detailed it is. Almost all the information, I will say, is in the guidance document. So almost every input here is laid out in some form or the other in the guidance document. So we really haven't really created additional kind of hurdles or asking for additional inputs that weren't already detailed in the program guidance. So hopefully that's helpful. Sorry, that was very quick.
Yeah, no, that was good for me at least to get a sense of what you're looking for and what would potentially be needed. The one thing that comes to mind for me is that sort of demonstration of economic development priorities or housing need. Would it be useful if we've got stuff in our SEDS, REDC has stuff in theirs? I'm sure the local folks have stuff in their master plans or strategic plans or BRNEs, would it be helpful if we put together like a one-pager that highlighted just our housing related economic development goals in our region that we could make available to you and you all can make available to your developers to help them answer that?
On the economic development objectives one specifically, yeah, I wouldn't want it. I think that would be fine. You might want to consult with the other RPCs, obviously, so this isn't just an SRPC thing or a thought. Or you're welcome to kind of, for your projects, just upload that as well. Yeah. And I want to make sure.
I mean, really, I was just thinking of like, yeah, I would probably take about an hour, go through my seds and just make a bulleted list of, if you want to reference things, here's a handful of housing and affordability related references in SRPC's seds. I'm sure Teresa or Jen would probably be willing to do the same for REDCs. And I guess the municipal folks could decide whether they wanted to go any further than that, but at least those bullets would be out there and available for people if they're looking. I don't know if it wouldn't be helpful if you think everybody's going to be able to figure that out and answer it, no problem. Maybe we don't need to. It's just a thought.
No, it's a really good question. I just want to make sure that trying to think kind of equitably across the whole state. How do we get that? If we only have that information for SRPC, I think we're going to end up in the REDC communities, that information. I just want to make sure that if we're going to get that information from you guys, we really need it from everybody.
Oh,
otherwise,
I was thinking, I would send it around to this group and the municipal folks could share it with their developers, if they wanted it or if they were asking for help on that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Totally fine. Yep.
Yeah. I wasn't thinking I would send it to you on behalf of everything coming from the region.
Got
I
it.
was just thinking, trying to do a little bit of technical assistance to our communities and save some of those developers some time.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah. I think that's, if you want to do that, no problem. That's great. And just to answer I think Robin had a question of who's the staff person. So yeah, Sarah Reitzman is correct. Andrew Dorset is the new, is the director. He's still getting up to speed. So we're not I'm still kind of trying to answer most questions and doing more of the kind of public appearances right now. Since I wrote a lot of the guidance and I'm more familiar. He only started 12 days ago. So yeah, but and we are, I think there was an earlier, Robin, you also had a question of phone number. So we have purposely not put a phone number out there so that we don't get inundated with phone calls. As I think Janelle might have put earlier, I know James did. Yep, that for questions, email investnh@libfree.nh.gov. Then what we're going to do is compile all those questions into an FAQ document and kind of package them together, because we are obviously getting a lot of similar questions, so that we don't have to basically answer the same questions over and over and over again. We also just from our perspective, also want to make sure that we're not, we're being consistent in our answers as well. We're not saying somebody's eligible in one case and then giving somebody else's answer and giving a slightly different answer. So, yeah. And then I'm happy to talk just a timeline on the other programs, on the municipal programs might also be of interest. So on the planning, the 5 million planning and zoning program, New Hampshire Housing is going to be administering that program so they'll have a contract to do that, similar to how we're working with similar partners, Plan New Hampshire and UNH Cooperative Extension, that they currently use for the Municipal Technical Assistance Grant Program, the MTAG program, that some of you may be familiar with. And so there'll be some semblance of that being live, or at least a pre-application being live by July 29th. Assuming that contracts gets approved by GNC on July 27th. And then the other two municipal programs are the $5 million demo program. That application is also scheduled to go live, or those applications are also scheduled to go live on July 29th, and those will be administered directly by BEA. And I envision we'll have another webinar for specific to the municipal programs, hopefully the week of the 25th. Prior to the opening of the municipal application on July 29th. So I would stay tuned for more details. And if you aren't signed up for updates already, encourage everybody to go to invest603.com. You'll see a little, just so everybody knows what I'm talking about. You'll see a little sign up for updates here. And this is where we're pushing out kind of all the updates. I know an email just went out this morning that the application is live. Once we have our first set of FAQs up on the website, we'll push out another email that the FAQs are out. So if you aren't signed up on that list already, I encourage everybody to sign up, put your name and email address on that list. Can I help answer any other questions right now?
Thank you for giving us that timeline update on the municipal side, because we have been getting questions about how to develop projects for that. Is that one sounded like it was going to be a little bit more of a race to get to those funds? Are those going to be rolling, or is that also going to be, we open for a round and we score at the end?
So those are going to be rolling, but we're going to, I think at least, I can't speak on the mechanics of the planning and zoning, which you probably may be most interested in, because NIFA is going to be administering that. At least on the demo and the unit incentive program, those are going to be rolling, but we're going to obviously group applications. So every application that we receive after a month or whatever, we're going to create a time period, so that we're not waiting 6 months until we, go to GNC for approval for those.
Sure.
Can you go through what that can be used for again, Noah? The municipal?
Sure. So the municipal unit incentive program, which is the 30 million, will be units permitted within 6 months, with the understanding that the initial application was on or after February 17th, which is the date of the governor's state of the state. So when the program was first announced. And those funds will basically be able to be used for anything. There really are no restrictions on what a municipality can use them for. However, they can definitely be used for infrastructure. Yep, that would be great. But they're basically, however, note that we're only going to be providing it's 10,000 a unit for the units, for the affordable units. So, and this is where I don't think the messaging
up to how many dollars?
Let me check, but I want to say the award is $1 million to up to $1 million per community.
Well, that's damn good news for us. Thanks.
Yeah, I have to double check that guidance, but yes. Yep. So 10,000 a unit for all 80% of I units, permitted within 6 months if the initial application was on or after February 17th.
You can just go ahead and write me a check for $560,000 right now.
So if only it was that easy, Darren. Cool. So I know we're getting towards the end of the hour and I've taken up a lot of your time. Hopefully this was helpful and gets folks a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, definitely. Any other questions for Noah?
I just want to say thanks for doing this, James. Makes all the difference in the world. Posting these every 2 weeks, it's a big, big deal. Thanks a lot, man.
My pleasure.
So, and Sarah is noting, thank you, Sarah Reitzman's also on the call from New Hampshire Housing, that clarified that the planning and zoning dollars is going to be broken into two parts. One will be rolling, and municipalities are going to have a lot of options. And I don't want to step on their toes. We're still kind of working out the kind of final details there. But so, yes, so stay tuned on that.
Will do. All right, any other final questions, comments on the housing side? All right, I'm not seeing any, so thank you, Mikael. Thank you, Noah. A couple weeks from now, let's see, that'll be July 26th. We are going to be circling back to the issue of childcare. Ann Grassie from the Rochester Child Care Center is going to be joining us. But I think she is interested in, where last time we were sort of talking about big picture and trying to understand some of the challenges facing the childcare industry. I think she's interested in trying to spur that conversation towards thinking about potential solutions or approaches to supporting that industry, whether it's financially, business model wise, what have you, or just increasing availability. So if you have any friends that you'd like to invite to come for that conversation, feel free. I hope everybody will join us and be interested in that. I'm going to be out, but Natalie's ready to step in and run that call. So everything should go pretty much as usual. With that, anybody have anything else that you want to bring up this week that wasn't on the agenda? Going once? Going twice? Sold. We're going to wrap up 6 minutes early. Thank you all.